Hello all, I'm Scar SCS, but that is not important right now as we're doing a special episode of Cogs, Gears and Optic Sensors today. Instead of doing the usual coverage of a comic book, we're actually talking to a guest on the channel. You may recognise him from TFNation, where he has interviewed a number of Transformers comic book creators. You may have also heard his voice more recently on the Talking Transformers podcast. So it is my pleasure to introduce David Wallace. David, thank you for your time this evening and welcome to the channel.
You are more than welcome, and thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Have spoken to a lot of creators, but getting the chance to speak about Transformers comic books, something you very rarely do. It always feels like it's the discussion that's after toys, after cartoons, then maybe we'll touch on comics. So it's always nice to touch on a little bit of reading.
It does seem sometimes, it does seem that given the wealth of comics and the wealth of Transformers comic books that are actually out there, they do often play second fiddle to some of the more, what I loosely term as mainstream media.
Despite the fact that one might argue that for the last 20 years, comic books have really driven the brand forward.
Yeah,
more than any cartoon.
I can certainly think of times when we've not had a show, a conventional Transformers cartoon show on the air, but I can't really think of a time other than sort of slipping in between license holders where we've not actually had comic books on the shelves.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, what are we looking at? We're looking at, well, I mean, we're going to talk about it. That, you know, there's the 6-month gap between Dreamwave and IDW, and then there's like the 6-month gap between IDW and
Skybound Image. Yeah.
Skybound. I don't know why I had Stormbringer stuck in my head, and I'm like, no, that's definitely a Transformers comic book. Skybound. Yeah, so that's it. And I mean, you know, with perhaps the lone exception of Transformers animated and the live action movie, like what has been more impactful to the brand than what's been going on in the comics?
Yeah, huge. So, and not just the brand as a whole, but when you look at some of the followings, and particularly some of the way that your audience and your attendees have changed at TFNation, the Transformers comics have been probably more impactful of bringing people into the franchise than the other media.
100%. There's no question at all. There was a seismic shift in terms of, and I don't just think the UK, but I think just Transformers in general. I think IDW, and more specifically More Than Meets the Eye, has really brought Transformers as a brand to the doorstep of people who wouldn't normally be interested in it. And I think that, coupled with the kindness and the openness of the fandom in general, just means that there's a whole new generation of people who fall in love with Transformers. And, you know, these are people who, and I don't mean to, like, you know, tar everybody with the same brush, but these are people who might not necessarily want to buy toys or might not necessarily want to go back and watch Generation 1, but they are as much a Transformers fan as anybody else. You know, so yeah, like, I mean, the comics are absolutely instrumental in the longevity and the strength of the brand, including Dreamwave, which we're going to talk about. But to a much lesser extent.
Do you like Dreamwave, Dave? You've never mentioned it.
No, I know. I don't like to talk about Dreamwave because, well, you know, everybody talks about Dreamwave. It's you know, I can't walk down the street without hearing somebody talk about Dreamwave comics.
So
yeah.
So obviously, when you and I, we follow each other on social media, and I know you're a big comic book fan. You can tell by the wall behind you that you are a big comic book fan, and I know just a little bit. And I know DC is your bag, for want of a better phrase. But for yourself, in terms of getting into Transformers and comics, are you a Transformers fan because of comic books, or are you a comic book fan because of Transformers?
I am a comic book fan because of Transformers.
Wow. So Transformers, like Marvel UK, was your pathway to?
Absolutely not. I don't remember reading a single Marvel UK comic book growing up. Like I was 100%. So I was the kid in class. I do apologize if you hear some barking in the background. It's me dog's witching hour. I will do my best to try and
Does the dog
calm her
just want
down.
to get involved? Does the dog like Dreamwave? Is that the issue?
Oh, she better, or otherwise she's out. Yeah. So, like, not to bore everybody, but like, I was that kid in class who couldn't read. I just didn't get it. Like, we would, to give people a sense of where I was at, like growing up. Every Friday in junior school, we would go to the library and we would have to pick a book and we would have to take the book to the teacher and basically say, this is the title of the book, this is what I'm taking out over the weekend, and then you would have to come back the next week to tell the teacher a little bit about the book that you read. I couldn't read to the point where I would pick the book up from the library and I would make sure that I walked past my friend Jonathan and asked him what the name of the book was, so that I could tell the teacher. So, like, I was one of these people who I couldn't read, but I was incredibly deceitful. And specifically, like, how I used to get around it was I would pick books for stuff that like back in the day, old Ladybird books, where it would be a translation of a cartoon episode or something like that. I would find the books that I sort of recognized. Like, I remember that cartoon, I've seen that episode, I have that on videotape. And so whenever the teacher would ask, oh, well, what was the story about? I would be able to tell them because I'd seen the cartoon. Like, one story that my dad always used to tell was that when I was in nursery, so if, four or something like that, my dad comes to pick me up from nursery, and the teacher says, Mr. Wallace, can your son read? And my dad says, no. And they went, well, he's just read a book. And my dad's like, what do you mean? Like, we were sitting down on the carpet for story time and David wouldn't stop talking. And I asked David, do you want to read the story? And David said yes. And David stood up, took the book out of my hand and read the story word for word. And my dad was like, that's not possible. Can I have a look at the book? And they handed it, and it was one of these Ladybird books. And it just so happened that it was an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine that I had on videotape, and I'd watched it enough that I'd memorized it.
Wow.
So yeah, I didn't read as a kid. Like, I really didn't. And it wasn't until... So this is a weird thing in my relationship with comic books. This is where my comic book relationship started. I was on holiday down south, walked into a W.H. Smith and found on the rack the first trade paperback of The Death of Superman. So this would be about 94. So by this point, I'm like 11, 12. And again, still just, I'm not reading, like I am hiding it. And what I would do is, again, I still wouldn't read it. I would look at the pictures, and this is perhaps where my love of sequential storytelling comes from, is that I was able to make my own story as to what was going on. I was having the conversations in my head. Totally separate, and all of that, and then this was the weird thing. A couple of years later, the BBC released a audio drama of The Death of Superman.
They did Batman's Night Quest as well, didn't they?
Nightfall, yeah. And that was the first time that I was able to read the Death of Superman trade paperback and sort of get a sense of what the story actually was. And slowly but surely, that's how I started reading. So I didn't start reading until I was in my mid-teens. And then I just became a voracious reader. I can't turn around and say I was dyslexic or anything like that, because I'm not. Like, for whatever reason, I just did not like the idea of reading. And then one day,
just clicked.
Just changed and all of that. But I didn't read comics. In fact, like the very first things that I started reading was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, because I loved Sherlock Holmes growing up, still do. Like, so I went from not reading to reading Sherlock Holmes, and that was it. And then, lo and behold, it's the early 2000s. Me and my friends are in Newcastle, and we have a Forbidden Planet here, as many large cities in the UK do. And we'd go in every week and stuff, and we'd look at the toys and stuff like that, and that was cool. And then one day, I just so happened to be walking through the comic book section, and on the shelf is the first 3 issues of Dreamwaves Transformers. And I buy them, and I read them, I fall in love with them, and because I'm going back to the comic book shop, that's when I go, hey, that Superman, that comic of that front cover of Action Comics is referencing Akira. I get that reference. I'm going to buy a Superman comic. And then, of course, once you're in there, it's like, okay, well, now I'm reading like basically all of DC a month, and that was it. Like, and I fell in love with comics again as like a medium, as an art form. I still think it is the best art form because, up until very recently, up until the last 20 years, you could not tell any story as a movie, but you can tell any story as a comic book. And that was it. Yeah. So not only did I not read Transformers comic books, it was a Transformers comic book that got me buying it, and that was Dreamwave. And that's why I will always say, and we can talk about this more as we talk about Dreamwave itself, I will never turn around and say Dreamwave was good, but I will say that my heart belongs to Dreamwave because it literally made me fall in love with Transformers.
Yeah, now, see, I know there are a lot of negative connotations around Dreamwave and some of the way that certainly ended, and those kind of stories that they're out there. And I don't really want to touch on those too much this evening. But it's interesting you mentioned that about going into the Forbidden Planet and seeing that stuff on the shelves, because that does bring me around to something that I did want to touch on. And I think Dreamwave was so perfectly timed. When you look at people in our sort of age bracket, our sort of demographic, you look at that very, very early noughties, 80s nostalgia that was going on. You look at, you've now got your Dreamwave comics on the shelves. You've got the book box reissues coming out. I say the book box reissues, the Transformers collection by Takara. You've got the Hasbro Toys R Us commemorative series coming out. I think I'm right.
You've also got the Titan reprints.
You've got the Titan reprints
like
for us here in the UK. You've got alternators coming out in that time period, and even the very first Masterpiece. You've got that very first Masterpiece Convoy came out 2004 or whenever, which was, I appreciate, was the very, very tail end of Dreamwave. But in terms of dragging people from our sort of demographic back into the fandom, or even starting their journey in the fandom, I think Dreamwave was just so perfectly placed to do that, and I can't see Dreamwave having had the impact it did if they'd have just been like 2 years either side of that.
No, I mean that's it. Like, talk about timing, talk about a perfect storm, because there's all of that stuff you mentioned, and the other thing which I think was massive and instrumental in the bringing a lot of people like myself back into the fandom is eBay as well.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden now you've got a marketplace which, and for maybe there's a lot of listeners who are tuning into this and they're thinking to themselves, oh, world without eBay. But yes, like the reality is, again, it was still a relatively new thing then. So yeah, we were already seeing the start of 80s nostalgia at the end of the 90s. And, I distinctly remember for my 18th birthday, which was the year 2000, so we're just about a year and a bit away from Dreamwave, 2 years away. Takara does the re-release of Optimus Prime.
Yes, the New Year's convoy,
And
whatever it was called.
yes, exactly. And that was the one Transformer that I got for Christmas, and that was sort of the first Transformer that I got in, well, I mean, that would be like almost 10 years, I would
Yeah.
guess, and I bought it purely thinking to myself, well, I just want that Optimus Prime. Like, once I've got Optimus Prime, that's fine. I don't need any more because, you know, like a lot of people, Transformers is dead.
Yeah,
Like,
it's not a
Transformers doesn't
thing.
exist anymore.
It's not still going. It
Yeah,
can't be.
exactly. Yeah. And then, lo and behold, you see the Dreamwave comics. And as you say, I mean, that that sort of 10-year cycle of nostalgia from going from being 7 or 8 when you fall in love with something to becoming 18 and then starting to have a little bit of disposable income, or in my case going to university and just spending your student loan on Takara book box sets and every Transformer that you get your hands on, and then all of a sudden you start realizing, oh, wait a minute, so there's this thing called RID. What's that? So you start going in there and, oh, look, here is all of the RID toys. Well, I'm buying all of them because now I'm into transfer, and and then down the rabbit hole you go. And I would agree with you. I think if that had hit like a couple of years later, or it had hit a couple of years earlier, I wouldn't have been in that sweet spot, at least for me anyway. So yeah, timing is everything. I say timing is everything. Timing is everything, or talent is everything. And I think what we're seeing here is, especially with Skybound and obviously the monumental success that's had, I think that goes to prove that talent is a big factor in success as well, especially in the comic book world where, for the last 10, 15 years in the comic book world, we have seen talent basically driven out of it because there's just not enough money, especially amongst the big two, to pay really good talent. And that's not to say there aren't excellent people working in comics. There absolutely are. But that's a very small minority based on the output of the comic book industry. But that's a completely different thing.
Very much so. So to go back to that kind of that early noughties sort of 80s nostalgia, would it be fair to say for yourself, no Dreamwave, no adult Transformers collecting David Wallace?
100%. Like 100%, yeah. Like, that's not to say that maybe
something would have caught your eye or
don't catch something. Yeah, exactly. Maybe Armada might have done it, but I remember, and again, this is going back 20 years. Armada wasn't the easiest thing to watch here in the UK. And again, let's be honest, the Armada cartoon, not exactly known for its quality. I think in terms of just the impact that had, yeah, there was no way that I would be sat here talking about it now. At least that's what I like to think anyway. Who knows? Like, yeah, but maybe when the live action movie it came out. But then that's still an extra like half a decade. And even then, even then you're kind of like, all right, okay, they've done a live action Transformers movie. It wasn't as cool as the '86 movie. Thank you very much. I'm not invested. But I think like anything in life, it's all about timing. So yeah, 100%. If Prime Directive doesn't come out when it did, I don't think I would have been a Transformers.
Oof, ouch. So
I know it's hard to believe, right?
And that is, and not just for the contributions that you made for things like TFNation, that obviously we know you're heavily involved in, but how much of an impact being part of the TF community has had on you, and what a different direction that would have taken yourself in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Not having TFN, I mean, one, I would have a lot more free time, so that would be great.
But you could read more DC
You
comics
know,
with that free time.
I could, but then again, without that Transformers comic book, I wouldn't have read DC Comics either. Like, I probably wouldn't be as invested in comics because there's with comic books are a weird thing in that um a TV show comes along and a TV show lasts, I don't know, 5 to 7 series or whatever it is, and people will often say like, oh, a TV show got worse as it went along, or it got better as it went along, or the whole thing was just awesome. And people will, argue about the quality of uh, this series versus that series, or whatever it might be. But with comic books, it is very much a case of, because they never stop, and especially DC, because Superman has been in publication for 80 years non-stop, you can't ever turn around and say Superman got worse or Superman got better, because it's like that.
It's happened.
And so people have eras that they love. And so, for me, who got into comics in the early 2000s, my love of those early 2000 comics, and I have these arguments all of the time with people at TFN, especially, big comic book fans like Andy Turnbull or Chris McFeely. It's like, they will turn around and say, yeah, but this comic is crap because it did this character dirty. And I'm like, yeah, but I never had any reference point for this character till this point. And so this is my version of this character. Which is kind of like why I always say to people, like, now, yes, it's easy to dog on the live action movies for like how ridiculous they are or overblown they are or something. But for somebody, that's their Transformers, and I've got no right to mock them.
Everybody's got an entry point. Everybody's got an entry point somewhere.
Everybody has, yeah. The old saying though in terms of comics is, any comic is somebody's first comic, and that is why I can read Watchmen and I can appreciate Watchmen. But do I think Watchmen is the be all and end all of comics? No. Why? Because Watchmen was nearly a quarter of a century old by the time I started reading comics. So all of the good and bad that was taken from Watchmen, I was already getting, So comics are like this weird thing. And that's kind of like why. I mean, look at IDW. Like, and I know we'll get onto Dreamwave and we'll talk more about Dreamwave, but like, look at IDW. I mean, IDW is what, like 4 distinct chunks.
Well, the phases as they branded them as, didn't they? Yeah.
Phases as they called them. Yeah, exactly. Several phases and 1 reboot. And there is no shame in somebody turning around and saying, oh, well, I like this version. I really don't. Like, one of my biggest regrets about Transformers comics is I think the Asian idea could have gone on for years. Like, the idea of a Transformers Cold War, I think is excellent.
Absolutely.
Like,
but we all want to see giant robots punch each other in the face, though, to be fair. We don't want a Cold War. We want to see giant robots punch each other in the face.
Well, this is true. And I suppose that's part of the reason that I like fell in love with like Dreamwave, because I mean, one, the main thrust of it is it's Sunbull. So I grew up on the cartoon. So for me, it is because obviously the Transformers comic book was massive in the UK. It was successful in the US, but not nearly as influential as it was for people in the UK. So the vast majority of Transformers fans in the US grew up on the cartoon. We see that with Skybound. It's blatantly like a Sunbow. I mean, well, the last story arc we've got was basically Starscream's Brigade. For better or worse. So for Dreamwave to come out and basically just be like, here is Sunbow again, but with this manga-ish art style, like really captured my
Which was, and
attention.
again, just to
You know?
to go back to the art stage, just mentioned that was again that was huge. That sort of that manga, and hands up, I know absolutely nothing about manga and anime apart from recognizing some of the big things like Gundam and Macross and Robotech and things. But that art style was really very fashionable. I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for. And you look at a lot of things that were coming out in the early noughties. You look at your Pokemons, your Yu-Gi-Ohs, your Digimons, all that kind of big push to that aesthetic. And the series that are
Mm.
being pumped, the Unicron trilogy series, certainly with Armada and things beforehand. So it seemed a very natural thing for Dreamwave to adopt that.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, yes, as you say, we can skirt around the negativity of it. The fact that, like, did Pat Lee draw all of it? Probably not. Did Pat Lee, force a house style that made artists draw in a particular way? Yes, absolutely. But to be honest, so did
Yes.
Image. This is not. This is not new. I think a lot of people look at what Dreamwave did and were are very much happy to point the finger and say, "Look at all the terrible business practices that these people embarked in." Yeah, that was kind of the comic book industry in the '90s, especially when it came to create our own and stuff. Like, one of the things that I said in the presentation that I did about Dreamwave is that, you know, Pat Lee grew up or got his start in the industry at Image under Rob
Yeah.
Liefeld. And so when people look at that image of Pat and Roger and the other fella walking through the explosion and basically being like, "Oh, isn't this funny?" Like, because Dreamwave exploded, uh, and they keep calling him rock star artist Pat Lee. It's like, yeah, because they were rock stars.
Well, I think,
Um,
and again, the risk of making us sound old. If you weren't there at that time, and of course, a lot of people won't realise that the comic book industry in the early noughties was still really recovering from that speculator boom of the mid '90s, where sales had effectively tailed
yeah,
off. And for someone like Dreamwave to come along
yeah,
and make those sales do that, which they did, it's no wonder that they were being referred to as rock star artists. Yeah,
yeah, 100%. I mean, and I've talked about this before in the past. You know, Dreamwave becomes Dreamwave's Transformers comic book, the first series. For 6 months, Dreamwave is the best-selling comic book in North America. 5 issues of the ongoing and 1 issue of Transformers Armada. Yes, everybody, Transformers Armada was the best-selling comic book distributed through Diamond in North America. And you could compare those numbers to the numbers that Marvel UK sold in the UK alone in the '80s, and it's not even
but it's a
comparable.
very
It's not.
different
It's not
market.
even
It was a
close.
very different
Very
market.
different market at this point. But also, as well, we are still in an era where the internet is still relatively new, um, and more to the point, like places like San Diego Comic Con is a
But
comic book
no,
convention. Uh,
no.
Shock horror. Um, the guys, the team that wrote the Death of Superman tell the stories about, like, and I mean, obviously the Death of Superman was '93. They talk about going to, like, comic book conventions around the time that they're putting that book out, and they turn around and say, like, it was at that moment that I realized what it must have felt like to be a Beatle, because they were absolutely swamped. You know what I mean? And again, I will never give Pat Lee the benefit of the doubt in terms of the business, because at the end of the day, they were in charge of the business, and the business is the thing that tanked. But I totally understand why a 20 something year old who likes to hang out with his mates and play video games would make really poor business decisions based on the fact that they have just sold 6 months of the best
Yeah,
selling comic book in the
yeah.
world.
So you start believing your own
Like,
hype, don't you? But it,
Well, that's it.
And it's interesting, but some of the Dreamwave stuff, and again, sort of to turn it onto the positive, and I'm going to be just check my notes that I wanted to make before we spoke this evening. Some of the legacy impact that Dreamwave has had is still with us today, and you look at, I mean, and the things that really spring to mind for me are the Fallen, and obviously we have just had that toy, that incredibly well received toy of the Fallen.
I was when the announcement came out, 13 primes, we're going to have the Fallen and stuff. It's like, why he didn't look like the movie Fallen, I have no idea. Like, I was stunned that they went with the Dreamwave design.
But the fact, I think that the fact that they have, and that was again, to use that word, aesthetics, it's the fact that that was what they went with, I think is a phenomenal nod to how impactful the Dreamwave comics have gone. We mentioned it briefly on Ian's live stream, on ArrowFyre, live stream the other evening. And for anybody that hasn't seen that, please go and give ArrowFyre a look on YouTube. Very, very good friend of myself and David's, and very good toy reviewer to boot. But the white Blockies Ultra Magnus, that was only released this year. And for Dreamwave to pick that up, and when you look at that concept of the cover art of Ultra Magnus kind of falling out of his armor and being the white prime cab robot, you look at it and you think to yourself, that is so obvious. That is so obvious, but I bet there is not a single 80s kid who ever played with their Ultra Magnus like that.
You know, one of the things that I would say in terms of the failure of Dreamwave is that it was quite clear that Adam Patek and Brad Mick, or James McDonough, were clearly Transformers fans. And I think it was their love of Transformers that ultimately doomed the book, because sometimes fans can get in their own way when it comes to nostalgia. But saying that, the notion of asking the question of why did the Ultra Magnus toy come with a white Optimus Prime? Well, maybe it's armor, or doing things like turning Shockwave into a scientist.
Yes,
Shockwave wasn't a scientist in Marvel. He wasn't anything like that. Like, they defined Shockwave as a character. So yes, you can roll your eyes at the opening of like the ongoing, when Starscream's standing in the pond, standing at the lake, and he's got the crown and stuff, and in his head and stuff, and when he throws Megatron out of the shuttle, and it's all very nostalgic. And you can roll your eyes at that, but ultimately they did some really interesting stuff, which, the question is, would we have had Minimus Ambus 20-something years later if we didn't have the white Ultra Magnus in Dreamwave?
And you know what? It's only now that you've said that I've never made that correlation before. And now that you've said that, I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah. James took exactly the same idea. He just took it in an unsurprising direction, and put his own twist on it. But ultimately, it's the same idea. And I like both. I like the idea that Magnus is this powered up version. I would have loved to have known why he wears it. I think we might have found that out, given the fact that we were supposed to be getting because in Dreamwave, Optimus Prime and Ultra Magnus are brothers. Like, which again you would see that in RID 2001 as well. So, it's not the first or the last time that that's been thrown out as an idea. But I think in terms of legacy of Dreamwave, the thing that always springs to mind for me is the likes of Guido Guidi, Don Figueroa, Alex Milne, Josh Burcham, Josh Perez. Like, that is the legacy. The legacy is that they created an entire new generation of Transformers artists, and they were the ones that got Simon Furman back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And put him back on a Transformers book.
Well, they didn't just get him back on one Transformers book, did they? He did a number of titles for them, all of which were reasonably successful in their own right.
Well, yes. I mean, I still love, probably my favorite thing that Dreamwave ever did was that the first War Within miniseries. I love that. Like, again, something that you had only ever thought of in your head, which was what was it like before they left Cybertron? Because in the cartoon, you get to see them on Cybertron for like 2 or 3 minutes in the first episode. In Marvel, you might got some flashbacks, but a lot of it when they went to Cybertron, it was all modern day. But then War Within was the first one where they were like, no, we're going to show you what the war was like before they leave. And I think all credit to Simon as well. War Within wasn't the story of the Transformers leaving Cybertron. War Within was, no, I'm just going to tell you what it was like for them, maybe hundreds of thousands of years before they leave Cybertron. How many volumes of War Within could we have gotten if Dreamwave had stayed in business? Who knows? But the other thing with War Within was, like I say, it was the fact that Don, and I know a lot of people talk about Don's need to redesign everything. But it was literally the first time you were seeing people with unique Cybertronian modes. Yes, they had them in More Than Meets the Eye. A couple of characters did, and that sort of made sense. But the fact that he redesigned pretty much everybody, and the fact that you could look at those designs and go, I know how that would transform.
Yes. It was so
that was beautiful.
It was, the guy's incredibly talented. And I say this as somebody who can't draw, who can barely draw a stick man, but it was so commonsensical the way his stuff looked. It was so instantly recognizable, and it was so commonsensical. And the alt modes that the alt modes that the characters had made sense in the context of the character as well. It wasn't just a question of, oh, there's Ironhide, we'll do a vaguely looking van thing. You're kind of looking at it and went, oh yeah.
Yeah, and they give him the windscreen face, nostalgia hit to, the original toy. Just there was so much to love in that first series of War Within that I was just like, oh man, this is brilliant. And on top of everything else, the other thing that I would say about War Within, which I loved, was outside of the '86 movie, up until that point, the Great War was a series of random skirmishes. It was the 4 or 5 characters for this episode or this issue of the comics versus the other 4 or 5 characters that we're going to put in it. So at no point did it ever feel like an actual war until you got to the first 20 minutes of the 1986 movie, which is why I still maintain that is part of the reason that that movie lives in Transformers fans' hearts, because it's kind of it's the distillation of what you think of Transformers, and then War Within comes along and you get to see it. When the Decepticons attack Iacon, yes, it's in comic book form. You're not seeing it on a big screen or anything, but you're seeing just this onslaught. And I loved it, and it was one of those first times where you're like, oh, right, yeah, it's a war, isn't it?
Dave, while we're talking about War Within very, very briefly, do you want to touch on a little project you did around War Within more recently, and where people can find that?
So it's not really a project that people can find. But so War Within ended with volume 3 of War Within, called The Age of Wrath. And because of Dreamwave's bankruptcy, it was scheduled for 6 issues, and we only got 3 issues published. What we knew for the longest time, for many, many years, was that War Within Volume 3, Issue 4 was done. And we knew that some of Issue 5 was done. And we knew from Simon that he hadn't even written Issue 6. But obviously, over the course of 20 years, certain pages turned up, artists put them online and stuff, but we never had the full issue. And what I was able to do was, over the course of talking with different artists, different writers over the years, I was able to reassemble the full issue 4 of War Within, but it was redone from scans of pages and random images that had been put up online. Effectively, it wasn't the best quality. So what we did was we took all of it and we had it completely re-lettered so that you can actually read it. And nice. As part of the mini-con in Manchester, we got the permission from all the writers and the artists, bearing in mind people who were not paid for this, and we were able to put it out for public consumption. So yeah, if you go to TFNation and look through the stuff, we've linked to it and things like that. And yeah, you can read a Dreamwave issue that was ready to come out but never did. And then you can read it and be like, oh, great, and then know that you'll never be able to finish the rest of the story off.
So 20 plus years later, you can categorically say it is the last ever Dreamwave issue to be released into the public domain.
No, I wouldn't say that.
I'll hold you to that one day.
I won't say anything else. But what I will say is, and this isn't me saying that like stay tuned or anything, that was not the only completed issue of Dreamwave.
Excellent.
Because at the time Dreamwave went bankrupt, the ongoing was massively delayed, and we know that. And I say the reason we know this because these pages have come out. There is at least half of issue 11 and half of issue 12 of the ongoing. Mm-hmm. But we also know that Energon 32, was it? I want to say it was issue
Energon ended with 30, didn't it? That was the last publicly released.
Okay, so if it ended with 30, then 31. 31 was due out like 1 or 2 weeks after, which means Energon 31 must exist.
In fully printed form.
Well, not necessarily printed. I've heard stories from, and again, I'm not going to say who's told me this, but like I have been told by one person who worked for Dreamwave, not at Dreamwave's head offices, but they are sure that at least one of the Dreamwave issues saw print and was pulped. But I've only ever heard that story from one person, and as far as I'm concerned, if you don't hear it from two separate people, it's not true. Not necessarily that it's not true, but it's not verifiable. Yeah. Now, could that have been War Within? Probably, because that was the book that was supposed to hit beforehand. But Energon 31 must have been print ready if it was going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Now, there are pages of it knocking around, but as to whether or not we could ever get a complete version of it, I've no idea. Again, what the benefit I think we have of it is that Simon Furman was the writer on the book, and Alex Milne was the artist. But we also have to remember that this was back in the day before the internet was really a thing, where literally artists would be posting their pages in. So it's entirely possible Alex doesn't have the pages. So the question then becomes is like, did the pages just get binned when Dreamwave went under? Like,
Yeah.
does anybody still have those files? So who knows? Like, is the honest answer. But I would say that as long as there is a beat in my heart, I will continue to try and find more Dreamwave.
As somebody once said, David, it never ends.
Absolutely, yeah, that's it. Well, actually, you say that, but then, like, I think, if I was able to find Energon 31, like, I think at that point you kind of have to just be like, right, okay, that's it, because James McDonough and Adam Patek have said you're never going to find out what the story was. We never got paid, and quite rightly
Yeah.
so. I don't begrudge them at all. We never got paid, therefore we're sitting on the story, and that okay, cool. Like that's how it is. But yeah, but that was cool. Like I was able to find a piece of lost Transformers media, and that's always
So
cool.
everybody should
to
go
be involved
and
in.
check out the TFNation website to have a look at what you guys have got on there. And if they're not checking out the TFNation website, then quite frankly, they should be checking it out and buying tickets for the event anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that should be it, because who knows what surprises we might have in August. He says
There's
knowing
no
what
real
the
surprises are.
are.
I would just like to point out I have no knowledge of what the surprises are, so I have absolute plausible deniability in this chat.
You absolutely do. Yeah. I would be curious though, from your point of view, because looking at the stuff that you've put out on YouTube and stuff. Obviously, Marvel Comics, Marvel UK, a big thing for you. What was your take of Dreamwave then? Like when
it was
hit?
very not too dissimilar to yourself, and to take back to that point I made about that real kind of perfect noughties nostalgia thing. So first issue of 2002. So I'd been working in my industry for still in the same industry, albeit not with the same organisation, but still in the same industry. I'd been working full time at that point for about 3.5, 4 years. So I was working full time. I had full time income coming in, but I was a big comic book fan, and I had been a big comic book fan since the very early 90s. So my first ever issue I recall picking up was a Amazing Spider-Man issue 330 something. It was a story about the Sinister Six. I can picture the cover by Eric Larson in my head. Can't remember the exact number. So I was a big comic book fan and regularly attending the local comic book store near to where we lived at the time. And then, like you say, there was this. There wasn't a huge. We were relying on Wizard magazine and previews. Kids, you will have to go and Google Wizard magazine and previews, because that's another topic of discussion.
And again, as I said, if it wasn't for Wizard magazine posting that article,
the 80s,
there's a very good chance that Dreamwave doesn't go for the license.
I genuinely just stumbled across it, and it was, like you said, that perfect storm. I recognised the art, but the art. See, I was very, as you say, I was very, very comic book orientated, and I've not had, from a Transformers perspective, and I've had this long running anecdotal theory that I can't prove in any way, shape, or form that UK fans identify with the Marvel comic book far more than they identify with the cartoon. Yeah,
100%.
There will always be exceptions to the rule, because people have had different levels of access to things. But the cartoon show here in the UK was very, very poorly screened. It wasn't a typical, you get home from school at like 4, 4:30, and it was on CITV or CBBC. We got those horrendous early morning snippets on TVAM and the Wide Awake Club. It was very, very difficult to follow the story. It would be on for sort of the school holidays, and then it would disappear for 3 to 4 months. So your Transformers content, your Transformers media was the comic books. So there was no two ways about it. And of course, in the UK, we had that advantage of getting all the UK stories that nobody else got. So not only were we getting the comic books on a regular basis, we were getting more comic books than everybody else on a regular basis. So to see those Dreamwave issues hit the comic book shelves, it was like, wow, here's Transformers. Here is Transformers that I recognise, because interestingly, and we're here to talk to you and talk about you, Dave. We're not here to talk about me. But I had a Saturday job as a excuse me, as a teenager at Woolies of all places, which spiraled horribly out of control. And when I finished my A levels, I somehow ended up, and to this day, I have no idea how this actually happened. I ended up on some in-house company management training program where they decided they would take people from within the business and push them through management rather than recruiting externally. I'm sure somebody somewhere identified a way they could save some money, and that was how I ended up on it. My main responsibility at that time was the old music and video, as was. And again, kids look up videos. They were a bit like 4K Blu-rays, but not quite the same. One thing I ended up helping out on at Christmas time, because it got really busy, was toys. So I had seen at this time in Woolies, I'd seen all this Beast Wars kind of stuff come through. So I was aware that Transformers still had this presence, but I wasn't really Beast Wars, didn't identify it, didn't really recognise it. Oh, that's cool, Transformers is still about, and just glossed over it. To see the Dreamwave stuff come back, G1, there's Optimus Prime, he looks like he does in the cartoon, there's Sideswipe, there's all the characters on the cover, there's Starscream, there's the Seekers. It was fantastic. And I think, quite frankly, it was such a surprise to see that license being done to such a professional standard. And again, go back to what we were talking about earlier, these rock star artists. The artwork was everything in that era. You could have told the most fantastic story in a comic book in that era, and if you didn't have the art to back it up, you weren't getting the coverage. I think is probably fair to say.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, comic books have always had this thing where you will go through a period where the writer is everything, which I think is kind of the era where we're going through again now.
We look at Bendis on
You would
Ultimate
go through
Spider-Man and things like that, those kind of eras. So
yeah, well, that's true. But then again, I would argue that that was Ultimate Spider-Man, Bendis and Bagley. That was just a marriage made in heaven. That was to my mind, that is still one of the definitive Spider-Man
very much so.
eras.
But yeah, to go back to what I was seeing on the shows, I was just absolutely blown over. And to be fair, I think they could have probably told the most poorly written story, or you could have given me. And
would say they did.
There were a couple that were lacking, but then when you start getting to the point where I'm seeing names that I recognise, such as Simon Furman, back on the title, and especially again we talk about that perfect storm of timing. I'm then in my comic book store and I'm seeing the Titan reprints on the same shelves. So I'm now in a position, and again, this is probably something unique to us here in the UK, but I'm now in a position to pick up brand spanking new minty versions of the G1 comic that I remember as a kid, which probably included an awful lot of issues that, because some of my comic book buying as a kid was a bit sporadic, probably included a lot of issues that I didn't have and was able to experience for the first time. And pick up brand new stuff from the same guy who wrote the stuff that I recognised. Which brings me on to something I know I wanted to discuss in around Dreamwave. Obviously, with Simon Furman doing the Armada and the Energon book, I picked up the Armada and the Energon book, having no real interest in what I would call mainline Transformers. I'm not the target audience for Armada or Energon. You're going to sell me the G1s, you're going to sell me the book boxes, you're going to sell me the Toys R Us commemorative stuff. I'm not going to go and buy a packet of mini-cons. Certainly not at that time. A very, very, very different ball game now. But Dreamwave did that ongoing book, and as we said, a moment ago, Energon made it to issue 30, and dare I say, had Dreamwave not gone the way it did, Energon would have probably carried through. I'm trying to think of the timing now. Probably carried through to 36, maybe even to 40 under the Energon branding. There's no doubt they would have gone into the Cybertron branding. Yeah.
Oh, Simon said in interviews that they were already planning, or he was already planning in his head the transition to Cybertron.
But Dreamwave seems to be the only, with a license holder, with an exception of a few mini series here and there as a bit of a promotional time, that have successfully captured an ongoing series in relation to the mainline toys.
Yeah. And to me, that 18, 19 issues of Armada is what I think of whenever I think of Transformers Armada. Like, there's a few things in the cartoon that I really like. I love Starscream's arc, just like everybody. Uh, you know, um, but there is so much more in those Armada comics, in those 18 issues of Armada comics, that I hold. Worlds Collide, which is the end of the Armada, is one of my all-time favorite Transformers comic book stories. Why? Because for me, it was the first time that I really got to see different Transformers realities like crossing over. Nowadays, everybody's done it. We're so sick of the multiverse and things like that. But the idea of Unicron sending heralds, again, something unique. Something that Dreamwave really brings to the forefront. The idea that it is Bludgeon, it's Galvatron, it for whatever reason it's Dirge. Was it Dirge? No, it was Thrust.
No, you're right. It was Thrust.
Thrust.
Yeah.
And Bludgeon, Thunderwing. Sending them. The fact that Galvatron was, and I always say this, it's like that is one of my favorite iterations of Galvatron, because I always read that version of Galvatron as what if Galvatron hadn't gone into the lava bath? Like, what if Galvatron wasn't insane? And what if Unicron had gotten Galvatron right? And I get this is totally like in my head, like a fan theory and stuff like that. But my take on it was that, this is what Galvatron should have been like if Unicron had gotten him right in Transformers the movie, which is that he was just this unstoppable nightmare. Yeah. Like, the bit at the beginning of it when he tries to take the Minicon Matrix, and they manage to escape from him, and he looks around and realizes that he's lost them. He doesn't get angry, he doesn't go nuts, he just gets back into the portal and leaves, and he's like, right,
next.
That's it. It's like next, like there are plans, and I always loved that. I did, and then the fact that the fight between him and Armada Megatron, and the fact that the Sky Air Defense Force, when they show up, and it's a cheesy line, but I love it, where they're just like, Megatron, heads up and hand, and he just sticks his hand up as they combine into the Star Saber, and it's just like, and then you turn the page, and the next thing you know, Megatron's just murdered Galvatron with a Star Saber, and you're like, yeah.
But it's, it's great stuff for us in particular from a storytelling perspective. But I think it's really interesting. You look at how long IDW. I mean, IDW had that license for sort of 17 years, and Transformers Prime's a big thing for me. I mean, I've always been a big fan of that, big fan of the cartoon show, big fan of the toys. But I think we got something like, I think we got that Dinobots miniseries. There was a Beast Hunters miniseries. I think we got something like 16 issues of Transformers Prime from the, use that word, the aligned continuity, which I appreciate is a little bit divisive in some places, but it's just nobody else has really ever picked up a mainline Transformers comic book. If you see the distinction I'm drawing between what I call G1 and the mainline kind of toys, it's never been done. It's never been done since, and it's never been done with such longevity since.
No, like IDW always had a weird relationship, I think, with like other facets of the brand. Like, as you say, you would get a Fall of Cybertron tie-in comic. That would be 6 issues. You would get 6 issues of Transformers Armada, or animated rather. You would get several Beast Wars miniseries tie-ins. but they would never commit full hog to an ongoing series. It was always just they would always skirt around it, you know. And I always thought that was a bit of a shame because, I mean, there was always a hankering for nostalgia, but IDW was sort of determined, I guess, to for better or worse forge their own path. Um, and to be honest, you can give them credit for that. Whereas Dreamwave, yeah, like I think Dreamwave had the best of both worlds, which was that they were doing their own story, they were doing their own ongoing series. They were doing War Within, which sort of catered to that fan that just wanted to see Transformers. They didn't want humans or anything like that. Um, but then, as you say, they had this third pillar, which was a the current Transformers, and so that meant that if you were a younger fan and you just happened to go to comic book shops and you liked Transformers Armada, you could buy that comic and get a different experience. In the same way that kids in the 80s who, you know, read the comic book could watch the cartoon, or those that watch the cartoon could read the comic book but get a different experience around the same characters. And I think that was great. And the Energon books were really good as well. I mean, you know,
and at the risk of and they they sort of tried to diversify some of that, and at the risk of having you hang up on this call, don't forget they gave us the Transformers Micromaster series, because everybody asks for that.
I genuinely, if I could chat with Adam Paddock and James McDonough, I would genuinely want to know why. Why did you do it? Like, if the answer was because when I grew up, I just had a load of Micromasters. If that was the honest answer, yeah, fair enough.
You could see it.
But man, like the fact that we got 4 issues dedicated to a bunch of characters that nobody has ever heard of, and it was like I'm about to go off on one here with the Micromasters, but the fact that like Micromasters didn't even like it wasn't as if there was even any suggestion that the Micromasters miniseries was going to pay off.
No, it just seemed very self-contained. It just seemed to be like literally this kind of one and done thing, and then put to the bed or put to the side. So it's more the point.
Yeah, exactly. It was so weird, so weird. The only other thing that I maybe could think of was that, one of the other things that Dreamwave did was that they did the More Than Meets the Eye books, and that was genuinely the first time that an awful lot of these Micromasters were fleshed out in any kind of meaningful way in terms of their bios. And the only other thing that I can think of is that, as writers, they're having to come up with all of these bios, because by the time a lot of these figures came out, I think Bob Budiansky was well and truly
with tech specs and things.
Transformers. He wasn't writing the tech specs anymore. And I wonder if they were just kind of like, oh, actually, I've written this really cool character. Oh, I really like this character that I've written. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to tell a story here? But the problem was, they wrote a story about a bunch of characters that nobody knew. It's like, look, we know Big Daddy and we know Erecto because he's funny. His name is a joke. Like, that's it. It was so.
Oh, and don't forget, and I can never remember his name. The one who got involved in the wrestling match in the Marvel books, the little red sports car guy, Road Handler. But yeah,
sure, why not?
He was one that always stuck out for me, because that was very, very tail end of the Marvel books, as far as Budiansky was concerned, and it was just like the most random story that this Micromaster, because obviously he's trying to sell the gimmick of these smaller Transformers. So what better thing to do than have him get involved in like a WWE wrestling match? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, look, Dreamwave was coming around, towards the tail end of the Attitude Era and stuff like that. I mean, you look at that ongoing with Don. There's suplexes, there's
Yeah.
DDTs, there's Stone Cold Stunners. You want wrestling in your Transformers comic books. Well, look at now. Daniel Warren Johnson, massive wrestling fan. Like, we're getting, wrestling and Transformers just go together, man. But 4-issue Micromaster miniseries does not a good business sense make, to be honest.
Which, to be fair, probably sums Dreamwave up in a nutshell.
It does. Like, if for those that may have not been at Minicon Manchester to hear like my sermon on Dreamwave, I make the argument the reason that the sales tanked at the end of the day was because in order for and some people agree with this, some people don't, but this is just my take on it, is in order for Transformers to be successful, Transformers needs to have a wide enough appeal to a general audience. Just like anything. Like, do you think that those first Transformers movies made billions of dollars because all of the Transformers fans just kept watching it? No, of course not. It's because it pulled in like a general audience. Um, you could argue that perhaps the reason that Transformers 1 didn't make $1 billion is because it is entirely set on Cybertron and it doesn't have any human characters for general audiences to relate to. And so I think one of Dreamwave's biggest mistakes was that when Adam Paddock and James McDonough took over, it felt less and less like a season 1 and 2 cartoon, which is what a lot of people still think of Transformers as. There are Transformers fans out there now who believe that Transformers ended with Transformers the movie. There isn't a season 3.
But again, it comes back to what we were saying a moment ago about it not being hugely accessible. The season 3 wasn't hugely accessible,
Yeah.
certainly for us here in the UK.
Well, that's it. When Dreamwave went belly up, the wiki didn't exist, and we didn't even have at this point yet the full G1 cartoon on home media. Like, you could get DVDs here and there, maybe a season 1 box set or something like that. But the whole thing,
Okay.
no, like it wasn't available.
I certainly didn't see all of season 3, G1 season 3, until I was well into my adult collecting the Metrodome DVDs. Until I got my hands on those Metrodome DVDs, I hadn't seen it because it was just inaccessible.
I remember the early 2000s, getting online with your 56k modem and downloading LimeWire and going, I wonder if I can get Transformers episodes. And then they're being like, oh, episodes 1 to 97. I'm like, there were how many G1 episodes? Like, because if you told me like season 1 and 2 had like 10 episodes, because again, I'm going off what was on VHS, and yeah, of course, Transformers has had an online presence and stuff like that, but it wasn't easily accessible for people. And because Dreamwave went too niche by the end of it, I think it drove a lot of people off. And you look at the sales figures, and when the ongoing started, the sales figures tanked. And I maintain that's because an awful lot of the casual audience were like, well, I don't know who these characters are. I don't know why I should be interested. I know Optimus Prime. Oh, but you've taken Optimus Prime off the board for the ongoing, and we'll never see him again.
Who's literally your flagship iconic character. And you can get away with doing that now in those kind of multifaceted stories that you're telling with we saw IDW do it, and obviously we've seen no doubt Skylander building up to that. And we even see it.
Prime ain't making it out of Daniel Warren Johnson's run alive. I would put money.
And you even see it in the in the very, very mainstream cartoons. I mentioned Transformers Prime earlier, and you look at the end of that Transformers Prime series, and then how we moved into RID 2015, and Prime wasn't the central essentially. You can kind of get away with it, but a bit more potentially because the Bay movies normalized it, for want of a better phrase. Yeah, you and I, yeah,
Yeah,
you and
they
I,
did.
you and I are still traumatized and got PTSD from 1986, but the general audience would not appreciate that Prime dies in every season.
Yeah, and it's not just Optimus Prime either. It's like human characters. You need to have human characters in your Transformers in order for people to have, Spike Witwicky was the gateway for people. Um, part of the big issue that people had for, well, still have to this day with Daniel is the fact that he was a much younger kid at a time when your core audience was growing up, and so suddenly the human character you wanted to relate to was younger than you. That doesn't work. Like, Spike was your older
Yes.
brother. Like, he was cool. um and I'm not suggesting that people read Dreamwave comics for the human interaction, but it's like there's a lot of humans in that first 6 issues, and that was the best selling 6 issues. War Within, for the best world in the world, was not the best-selling Transformers comic book in North America, which was all Transformers. And look at IDW. Like, through IDW's entire run, it sold 40 to fifty
Yeah,
thousand
give or yeah,
copies.
yeah. It's
Like,
not something I've looked into their sales figures, but yeah, give or take, and some issues, certainly some of the
yeah,
sort of the spin-off one shots, probably significantly less, probably significantly
yeah,
significantly less than that. When you look
yeah,
at what the big two is selling, and I think I'm probably right in saying that so a big title like Amazing Spider-Man, obviously the flagship sort of stuff, it's probably selling about 100,000 copies an issue, give or take on any given day.
yeah.
So if your top
Mhm.
selling Transformers comic is only, you're only hitting about 40,000 issues. Your spin-offy stuff, perhaps your Transformers spotlights, you're going to be a lot further down the chain, a lot further down.
Oh, definitely. Or alternatively,
Or
a Micromaster series. Like,
David,
yeah, it was
David,
a
there was
weird.
there was something else I wanted to touch on with you this evening. From your perspective of TF Nation and managing, not managing the guests, it makes it sound like you're herding them away and locking them away from everybody. When you roster your guests and things, we've got such a huge volume of talent from the comic book industry in the UK, and it does seem sometimes that we've got probably the lion's share of that. How does that work for you in terms of the kind of guests you want at TF Nation? And do you feel that TF Nation's kind of almost become very, very comic book orientated purely because of the attendees that you get?
Yeah, I think so. But again, I think that goes back to your point that you made earlier, which is that, and I would 100% echo this sentiment, is that, especially for people of our age, Marvel UK is the
Very
definitive
much so.
Transformers. No
There
question
are
about
other
it.
opinions out there, but those opinions are sadly wrong. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And as somebody who was that Sunbow guy, as the guy who read Target 2006 in the Titan format and went, ugh, this doesn't look like Dreamwave. I have many years later come to understand the error of my ways. Um, but you can't argue about the talent that was involved in those books. Simon Furman, Andrew Wildman, Jeff Senior, like, just to name just a few. Like, these people were incredible. Um, and it just so happens that they all live in the UK or UK adjacent, and then to get like the next generation,
Was
your Jack
exactly what I was going to come
Lawrences,
on to.
your
Yeah.
your James Roberts, your Nick Roach, like that. It's crazy, man, to think just how influential Marvel UK was. And so for us as a convention, it's fantastic. I mean, and Simon, I've said this to Simon before, and I felt bad saying it to him because I've known Simon now for 20 plus years, and I know how he reacts to it. But Simon Furman is without question the most important person in the history of Transformers.
Yes, easily.
Like, end of discussion. In terms of what he has contributed to the brand, did he create Transformers? No, he didn't. Did he define Transformers? There's a big argument to be said. Yes. In terms of everything that he has contributed, whether it be to Generation 1, whether it be to Beast Wars, whether it be to IDW, it's crazy. And so I love getting the comic book guests because one, I think they're vastly underappreciated, and we also have just had just some of the best Transformer stories ever written. The only thing that I would say in regards to Transformers comic books now is that we're in a very weird place because now that Skybound has the license, not only are we dealing with specifically American talent, but we're dealing with talent who are massive within the comic book industry. And I'm sure I'm not dashing anybody's hopes or anything, but we've had questions about would you invite Daniel Warren Johnson? Of course we'd invite him, but would Daniel Warren Johnson want to come to a little Transformers convention in the UK? Chances are probably not. And it's not because he doesn't want to, it's just that he's Daniel Warren Johnson.
And logistics are going to conspire against him, more than likely. Yeah.
Well, exactly, that's it. It will be interesting to see where Skybound goes. The only thing that I would say is, following the success of the Skybound Kickstarter, I will be fascinated to see where Skybound takes the Transformers books, because if you're a business and you need $30,000 to send a bunch of books to print and you make $3 million in several days, there has got to be some serious conversations going on in Skybound HQ.
Wasn't it? I can't recall it, but wasn't it fully funded in something like 7 minutes or something daft?
I want to say it was something like 3 or something like that.
I mean, it was literally like that, wasn't it? I mean, there's probably people that hadn't even finished their working day and kind of had a little mental memo. Oh, I must log on when I get home and have a quick look at that Kickstarter and get my order in, to find it was ready to go. Yeah,
100%. So I don't know. I would like to think that Skybound will go, hey, those Marvel comics, people seem to like them. Maybe we should get Simon to write a book. It's yeah, maybe you should. I don't know. Who takes over after Daniel Warren Johnson leaves? He's only got 4 issues left.
No, they've not. No, they've not announced. They've not announced anything yet, have they? Nothing at all that I've seen.
Yeah.
More than happy to be corrected if I've missed something, but nothing as far as I'm aware.
No, I don't. I've got to believe it's Kirkman. I'm 100% positive. Kirkman is taking over the Transformers book, because it feels to me like. And I appreciate we were supposed to be talking about Dreamwave here,
but we were talking about creators, so it works.
Well, that's true. Yeah. So I would say that Daniel Warren Johnson's job was to get Transformers into the mainstream. Into mainstream comic book fans, and he has done that. But I get the feeling that Kirkman is building to something. Daniel Warren Johnson is telling a story. Kirkman in Void Rivals is building to something. And I get the feeling that once Warren Johnson is done, Kirkman will then swoop in and be like, this is the grand opus that I am telling in Void Rivals.
Because that's the comment you see. The comment you see from, oh, when are we going to get another Transformers book from Skybound? And again, I'm doing it now. I know we said we're going to be discussing Dreamwave this evening. You see that comment, when are we going to get another Skybound book? And I think to myself, are you not reading Void Rivals? Just
yeah. Well, one you should be reading Void Rivals because it's literally the best thing in the Energon universe.
It is, and it's fundamentally a Transformers book in all but a name.
Yeah, it is. It's season 3 of, and it's just got a really good mystery. That's slowly unraveling, and it's got the Quintessons and it's got the Skuxoids, and it's yeah, like I love Void Rivals. I am lukewarm at the minute on Daniel Warren Johnson's Transformers.
Definitely, I think it's probably fair to say I'm probably not too dissimilar to Placing. I've been reading it every month, and it's kind of plateaued a little bit. There seems to be a reasonable amount that's been done in my humble opinion for a little bit of shock value. There's also some stuff where you can see they're obviously building to something where they want to establish some sort of flat status quo for whoever comes in and picks it up to say, this character's here, this person's here, this one's out of play. So they can kind of then move those chess pieces how they feel they need to move them. But it's quite obvious to the reader that that's what's happening. It's not being done in such a way that you can't see it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, the latest issue of Transformers that just came out is probably the first time in probably a good 6 months, where I've read Transformers and going, I actually quite enjoyed that. Like, with the Megatron. But again, that issue is really more of a companion piece to Void Rivals because it's dealing with the Quintessons and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of things that Daniel Warren Johnson has done that I don't like, but it's totally a personal preference. Little thing. So just to talk about like Dreamwave and Skybound here, like in terms of the comparison. As somebody who grew up on Sunbow, when I read the Dreamwave ongoing series, I read those characters in the voices that I heard in Sunbow. And it's perfect. Like it's 1-to-1. I can get it. When I read Skybound, I look at it and I'm like, this is Sunbow, and it's aping episodes from Sunbow, but none of the characters sound right. None of the characters sound the way they should sound in my head. People talking about their clans and stuff like that is like, okay, I kind of get where you're coming from with clans, but to me, it's clans have never been a thing.
It's
city states.
It's a dialogue thing, isn't it? It's a dialogue thing and a use of language and the like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. There's no right or wrong. It's just a personal preference, But yeah, like it's been a shame because I think the first 6 issues of Daniel Warren Johnson's run were absolutely fantastic. But I just kind of feel like I'm ready for it to be done now. But I never felt that way about Dreamwave because it was taken away from me
too soon. It was taken away too soon. And
yeah, whereas I'm ready for Transformers to leave. Unfortunately, with Dreamwave, everybody else just left Transformers. That was the sad reality of it.
David, I think on that note, on the sad reality note of it, it is probably time to wrap up. I've taken up more of your time this evening than I anticipated, and I'm genuinely grateful for it. So, where, David, as is customary on such chats, where can people find you if they would like to come and interact with you, or to
Hmm.
follow you on social media? Where are you at these days?
So there's Talking Transformers on Blue Sky, which is the only social media platform that I'm really active on, and there's the YouTube channel as well, and then obviously all of the other stuff that I'm doing behind the scenes is for TFNation. So we've got our big event coming up in August with guests such as Neil Kaplan, Evan, Michael Lee. So the Evan obviously played Jazz in Transformers One. Neil Kaplan, Optimus Prime, and then of course the incredible Scott McNeil. If you're a fan of Beast Wars and Beast Machines, and let's face it, who isn't?
I can think of one person we both
They're
know who
all
isn't.
well, yes, but we just pretend that person doesn't exist because they've made poor choices in their life. But we've got massive things planned for August. I am super, super excited. And as I said before, we've got something kind of sweet lined up, which I think might get people rather excited, or alternatively, if not excited, very, very curious. But I will leave it at that.
Harsh.
But we've got that coming up. And then, as always, we've got the mini cons, which we'll be announcing sooner rather than later. So, yeah, if you want to spend some time with people in the UK, you can come along to TFN, or alternatively, follow us on social media for all of the cool updates that we've got coming out.
Fantastic. And Dave, thank you again, and genuinely appreciated. Genuinely appreciate your time. And it's always a pleasure chatting to you, because every time I see you at TFNation, we seem to do this in a corridor, and then we do this in a corridor, and then we do this in a corridor,
Yeah.
and that's about the sum total of our interactions for about 4 days.
No, that's absolutely true. And, there used to be a point where I used to be young enough to be able to go to the bar afterwards, after I finished TFN. Now it's like bed. I need to sleep.
So, folks, that's it from myself and David this evening. As always, thank you for watching along. If you like what we're doing here on the channel, please consider giving us a like. Please consider giving us a subscribe. And if you didn't like what you saw, like it anyway. It does me a favour. And whatever do you do, folks, please stay safe. Thanks for watching.
Bye all.